call to order. So for roll call, I will call the board members' names in alphabetical order. If you have a camera, please turn it on briefly when I call your name. Jose Barajas.
Here, present.
Jeff Hornbuckle.
I am here.
Nick Koontz.
I am here, but do not have a camera ready.
Okay, James Langhorn.
Present.
John Maloney.
Here.
Jim Marston.
Here, no camera.
And Paul Spieler. I'm here with no camera as well.
May I ask a point of order here? Normally, if they have a comment on an agenda items, you wait until the agenda item. So right now, the 11 Anacapa is an agenda item, but I heard it's been pulled. So I have a few questions about that address I would like to ask, but do I do that under public comments or under the first agenda item? Since it's been pulled, I don't know if it's truthfully an agenda item or not anymore. It's on the agenda, but it's not being dealt with. So when should I speak?
Jim, this is Andrew Stuffler, the building official. How are you?
I'll find you.
Doing good, thanks. Yeah, so I would take this under, we'll still have, I would take this under public comment for the meeting, not for the item.
Okay.
Because in the announcements, I'm going to announce that the appeal was withdrawn, so there'll technically be no hearing.
Okay.
It won't be an item to have public comment on, so make it during the general public comment period. And Paul, just to clarify, Maria just gave the instructions for public comment, but didn't give, isn't saying that there are no public comment requests. So we'll still need to ask for general public comment requests for this meeting.
Okay, very good. So we're done with roll call. So now we will open for public comment for anyone wishing to speak about items not on this agenda. Please note, due to time constraints, each person may be limited to 2 minutes.
Mr. Chair, as a point of order, this is Andrew Stuffler, the building official. As I previously mentioned, item 1 has been, the appeal has been withdrawn, so it will not be heard today. Therefore, if anyone had wanted to provide comment, they would need to do that during this time.
Okay, I am Maria here. I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, well, then I would like to make a comment then. I did a lot of homework on this project, went down there and looked at it, and I'm very confused. There are at least 2 businesses open for business that only have one entrance, which is totally inaccessible. And I wonder why. Is there a permit number that gave them occupancy? But why do you have businesses in a place that has no accessible entrance at all? And then the CASP for the developer recommended a ramp or a platform connecting all those doors on Helena Street, but that was not put in the design. She asked for those doors to be closed, to say exit only, not to take the hardware off. The steps are illegal. The platform is illegal. The railing is very shaky. There's no painted stripes, contrasting stripes on the steps for the visually impaired. And I just don't understand why those businesses are in business.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The project's not completed.
Yeah, this is public comment, so let's let Jim finish,
Right.
Jeff, and then we can reply. We can't discuss the item because it's not on the agenda, but he can make his public comment.
Thank you. So my question is, you have retail shops in there serving the public through one inaccessible entrance. I know in the future they're going to fix it, but why do you have businesses operating for the public? How do they get in there? Where's the permit to say they can get in there? That's my question there. And also, there are no contrasting tactile domes in the backside. They're supposed to be a contrasting color, and they're the same color as the brick. So I don't know if that was a problem in the plans or in the plan check or the inspection, but I would like to understand what happened to the contrasting tactile domes. So that's my comments about why are they having retail in a place that's totally inaccessible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Do we have any other public comments?
I don't see any hand raised, no attendees, so no, there isn't anymore.
Okay, thank you, Maria. We will now close public comment and move on to the first subject item. First subject item is approval of the minutes of the Building and Fire Code of the Board of Appeals meeting of May 7th, 2020. Are there any comments from the board? Please unmute yourself and use a camera if you have one. If you don't have a camera, please announce your name before speaking. Okay, doesn't look like we have any comments from the board. We now need a motion from the board to approve the minutes.
John Maloney, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, John. Do we have a second on the motion?
Nick Kuntz, I will second.
Very good. Let's call the vote. Let's call the vote on the May 7th meeting minutes. We will use roll call to call for the vote. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Jose Barajas.
Aye.
Jeff Hornbuckle.
Aye.
Nick Kuntz.
Aye.
James Langhorn.
Aye.
John Maloney.
Aye.
Jim Marston.
Aye.
Paul Spieler. Aye. The motion carries. Are there any announcements from the board or staff? Please remember to turn on your camera if you need to speak or state your name if you aren't using a camera.
Mr. Chair, this is Andrew Stuffler, the building official, and as I've previously mentioned, item 1, what the appeal was withdrawn by the appellant. It will not be heard today.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chief Building Official Andrew Stuffler. Any other announcements from the board or staff?
No.
Okay, thank you. That brings us on to our subject item to endorse or revise structural plan review, scope, and intent. We would like the staff to present their position, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Andrew Stuffler, building official for the city. As the staff report explains, on June 23rd, City Council heard the Business Advisory Task Force recommendations. This is a group of business owners, and I know there was at least one architect, if not more, in this advisory group, or task force, I should say. And they made 10 recommendations, some of which involved building code and fire code applications and topics. They decided that, and our suggestion to them was to have these items brought before the Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals for your input, to gather your input, as you are the technical building and fire code experts in the community as appointed by City Council on this board. So today we're going to look at, this was item 6 on their list. And I'll read it to you so you can kind of get a feel for how it was explained. Defer to certified structural engineers stamped plans. So that was the only, it was a 1-sentence request. When we discussed this further, it sounded like the concern was if a licensed engineer has stamped and sealed the plans, then why should any plan review be needed? These people are insured and licensed and deemed to be competent by the state. So that brought up the research project for my office, was to look back and see, has this discussion occurred elsewhere? And if it has, what were some of the conclusions that were drawn, some of the facts or findings that were made? And fortunately, as attachment 1 to this staff report we found a white paper that was published by the Washington Association of Building Officials and the Structural Engineers Association of Washington. Even though it was published 14 years ago, its principles, I think, are still pretty well founded and on target. That doesn't mean we have to follow it, but it definitely provided some good context and justification for how a plan review, a structural plan review, should be conducted, especially in the collaborative sense with the engineer as opposed to adversarial or critical. And then there was a course that is offered by the California Association of Building Officials. I happened to attend this course not too long ago, last fall, I think it was, fall or winter. And very good one-day course. I included that as attachment 2. It was so big, though, we had trouble getting that attachment uploaded to the web for everybody to have access to. So this is the first you'll see of that, and it's 205 pages of PowerPoint slides. So it's an all-day training. So this is not something we're going to be able to go through during this meeting. But what I tried to do was take in my staff report, I talk about towards the end of my staff report, or maybe kind of in the middle, there's some numbered items. Hazard review and design criteria is item 1, and it has some sub items under it. And construction plans has sub items under it. Structural calculations have sub items under it. And then specifications. So I tried to glean and summarize the sections of that training that are given to building officials and structural engineers that work in building departments, to give the board a sense of, to what extent would we be looking at structural plans, structural details, structural calculations, what percentage of our time should be spent where, and that's a generality, right? That's not going to be for every single project, but kind of in general. So I'm looking for the board to have some discussion and to give some feedback to me. And if we come to the conclusion that what we recommend, because I wanted to start with a recommendation, so we have a starting point for the discussion. If you want to go with that, that's fine. If you want to amend it, I'm open to that as well, right? So I want to get the benefit of the intellect of the group and the experience of the group. So my recommendation in the summary is just a starting point for discussion, and I'm really interested in hearing the board's discussion on this and where we're going to end up, how we're going to define the extent of structural plan review, so that structural engineers and architects, people submitting drawings to us, calculations, designs, they know what we're going to be looking for, and they know when they get corrections back from us, the extent of corrections that they should see, right? And it's more predictable, and the outcome, hopefully, is that we have fewer rounds of structural plan review. And with that, I'll leave it to the board to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And I think now we're going to just open this up to comments from the public. And due to time constraints, each person may be limited to 2 minutes. Do we have anybody that would like to add a public comment?
Hello, Maria here. There are no raised hands, no public comment at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Maria.
Mr. Chair, this is Andrew. I just want to point out that where we have on the sidebar for GoToWebinar, there's a section that's called Handouts, and that handout section has attachment to the large, the 205-page PDF attached there. If somebody does want to download it, they can.
Thank you.
Well, this is Paul Steeler, Chair. I have a comment. Obviously, I'm a structural engineer, so this is pretty close to me. I really like that white paper that Washington building officials, together with the Structural Engineers Association, put together. In my experience, in my experience, I think it's important to have a plan review by the building department. It kind of gives you a second look, a second pair of eyes to look over your work and also catch mistakes. I've been on both sides. I've done some plan review myself, and you do find mistakes, and not everybody engineers the same. So I think it's important. I don't quite agree that if a structural engineer stamps the plans that should be, that should be considered gospel, because a lot of engineers aren't, don't necessarily put out a great product. And so I think the building department's important to keep some consistency there. So I really like this white paper, and the, to use that as kind of a guideline for plan reviewers to check drawings.
John Maloney here. I've got a couple comments. I do a lot of work with the State Architect's Office, DSA, and with OSHPD, hospital projects. They have a procedure where there's a pre-approval of plans signed by a structural engineer. It's usually for a prefab building or a prefabricated structural system, but they require structural review for everything. And as Paul said, I think it's important that a local set of eyes for the authority having jurisdiction take a look at the plans that the engineer is providing and not defer it.
Thank you, John.
I like both your, this is Jim Marston. I like both the comments. I had a note to make sure that I heard from Paul on this, knowing that he's a structural engineer. If I can have a few minutes, I'd like to say a few things. The disabled community was against this at first because, as Andrew said, it was written very vaguely. But we have seen entire plans stamped by civil engineers that even included accessibility aspects. And we were afraid that maybe a structural engineer could stamp the entire set of plans and get away with that. And so I think that Andrew's points here would not allow that at all. Is that true, Mr. Stuffler, that there's no way they can stamp plans more than the structural part and get them with this special compensation? Is that correct?
Board members, I don't, yeah, I think what we're proposing is that we follow the, we actually do a review. So there is no, there's no deferral of that responsibility. Sorry, I didn't turn my camera on. So we're not deferring the responsibility. We're going to do a structural plan review. We're just defining to what extent we're going to do that, and the elements that are going to be included in that review, so that it's the designers can successfully submit a application to us in the first or second round of review.
Okay, I just want to make sure that if the structural engineer stamps the accessibility items, that doesn't mean that they're still going to be reviewed by you, right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. That this was solely, the scope of this discussion is solely structural systems, structural drawings, structural calculations, not architectural features.
I just want to clarify that was what the only disability community had a fear with the way it was written. It sounded like, hey, whatever he stamps is going to be, yeah. So we just want to make sure that's not the case. Okay, so thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have a few questions I think you guys could all help me with. One of them is, why were structural engineers singled out for this treatment? Is that, I mean, I don't understand the whole process, but why not the civil engineer or the electrical engineer? Why somehow was structural engineering singled out here? Is there any easy answer for that?
Well, no, other than the term structural engineer was included in item 6 of the task force report. That may have even been more of a definitive request than they were looking for. They may have also wanted that to apply to civils, but they didn't say that. They said structural engineering.
But like I said, no one said, let's let the electrical engineer have this, or other types of engineers. I just was curious why only that group. Now,
I have maybe an idea, Jim.
Paul.
This is Paul Spieler, Chair. If you look at the building code, probably one of the thickest sections are the structural engineering portion. There's a lot of requirements. There's a lot of life safety at issue, such as buildings collapsing can kill people, things
Yes.
like that. So we have our E&O insurance is also very high. So there's a lot of responsibility and importance with our, the architect makes the building look nice, but it's not a life safety level like the structural engineer is.
Exactly.
So I think maybe, and then what happens is that the plan review process is pretty complicated and lengthy. Like quite often the structural engineer has the most plan check correction list from the building department. So, and I think it maybe also is the longest to sort out, and perhaps there's been some concern in the community that this process should be streamlined a little bit because it does take a lot of effort and time.
Okay, so are you saying that probably there's a lot of time is spent just on the structural design, and this would help speed up those things? Is that correct?
Well, structural design and then review of the structural design, because it's fairly
Okay.
complicated.
All right, thanks, Paul. I knew I could get good answers on that from you. So a few questions for Andrew, I guess. As you said, the white paper's from Seattle, and I had a question here: where's the Cabo report? But now it's there on the on our screen now. Why isn't there anything from the SEOC, the Structural Engineers Association of California? Don't they have any idea on this? I mean, I know that our rules, I think Paul would agree, are even stricter than Washington, especially for the earthquake seismic stuff. So did anyone check the Structural Engineering Association of California? And then I'd like to ask Andrew also, how many cities in California allow this kind of treatment of the structural engineers? I was just curious if other people are doing this or we're going to be the only one. And then my last question is, what action will be taken if we find sloppy or terrible work is discovered? Are your plan checkers allowed, or are you allowed to file a complaint with their certification board, or will they just get away with saying whatever they wanted to? Because we have seen some pretty bad, and Paul even alluded to this, we've seen some pretty bad structural engineering plans. What would be done if we find that? Is there any way to weed those out? And
Andrew, this is Paul Spielich here. I'd like to first answer that, and then Andrew, you can chime in if you'd like. But I think, Jim, right now this white paper is how plan check should be done, and it's, I think, pretty much how most building departments do it. The building department still has to review the plans, look for errors, but I think one of the important points in the paper was that the plan reviewer should not suggest that there is a better way to design something. That's not really his place.
Yes, I agree there.
But I think everything in this white paper is how a good building department should check plans, and how I think most of them do. And the city here is just trying to say, we'd like to adopt this paper to just give a better outline of, to the public of what happens during our review process.
Thank you.
Yes, and let me respond to your three questions, Jim.
Okay.
So SEOC, we did this item came really quick, right? So we have a July 2nd hearing today, and it was June 23rd at about, I think, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night when we found out we needed to bring this to the Board of Appeals, along with another item, which will be accessibility during the August meeting. So I did reach out to Structural Engineers Association of California, but very late. And that's something that we can wait to hear back from them on. If the board, I should have mentioned this, the board could defer their decision and ask for more information. That's one of the options the board has. You're not forced to make a decision today. I did tell City Council that we would try to get back to them after our August meeting. So we want to make sure that we don't defer our decisions too long and recommendations too long. And then what jurisdictions take this approach? I agree with Paul, although I do have to say we have never conducted a survey, and it would be pretty difficult to do given when you just look at the at the 205 pages in that attachment too of all the ways that you would validate these hazards and design criteria and things of that nature. I'm not sure we could survey the building officials in California and get very useful data from them, other than there are some jurisdictions that do not do a structural plan review. And when I started in the state of Washington in Pierce County, we only did non-structural plan review. So all we checked were the design assumptions to make sure the wind speed, the seismic zone, things of that nature exposure were correct in the calculations and the assumptions of the calculations. But we did not do any review of the structure. We made sure that the details that were in the calculations or that were provided by the engineer as part of the calculations were accurate or were the same as the details that were depicted in the architectural drawings or the structural set that was submitted, but no review of the actual calculations or anything like that. The county, I believe it was the county of San Luis Obispo, at least several years ago, not that long ago, only did non-structural plan review. And they may still do non-structural, I don't know, but so there are jurisdictions in the state that are in seismic zones that are significant that don't do a detailed structural review. That would be less than what we're proposing here. I think it's important to note that we have some of the highest seismic factors to deal with here in the city of Santa Barbara. For a little city, we kind of are in a really seismically risky place. And that might, in my opinion, that would warrant a better review, a more thorough review. Let's see, lastly, the consequences. Yes, anyone, building departments, clients, peer engineers can file a complaint with the state licensing boards if they feel that there's a professional who's licensed who is not living up to their either code of ethics or their minimum technical competencies.
Thank you, building official. I just was curious because do you really think that your reviewers would actually be able to come to you and say, this is totally bogus work and we have to turn this person in? Would they be able to do that? And could you back them up, or would there have to be a third party finding out about this? Would your office be able to do that if something was totally totally bad, like sloppy on purpose just to get something built? Do you have the manpower or the inclination to actually follow through on this? That's my little concern, is that this could be used as a way to get out of building the right thing. So I'm just concerned about that, that's all, but let me know what you think.
Well, Jim, I need a little more clarification. So in the proposal that's before the board as the staff report, what elements do you see that could be abused?
Well, I guess I'm just not sure how much of a review you would take. Would you do as much as you have done in the past? Is this going to lessen your review at all? Or are you still going to do all these points here one by one? If that's
Sorry
the
to
case.
interrupt. I have a question that is, I think it's along the same lines as board member Morrison. And the question is, we have various degrees of experience. We see that at any level, it's just part of gaining, your stripes, as they say. So how would you deal with having a new or less experienced engineer where it's meeting, for intended purposes, the intent of the code, but there might be some design feature that is concerning? How would you deal with that situation?
Okay, I'm gonna take Jim's question first, which was the extent of review. So the reason we're bringing this forward is so the design community and our plans examiners know what the extent of review is. So each one of those 1 through 4 items and their sub items would be the elements of the structural plan review that we would undertake. So that answers that. And then Jose, I don't remember refresh my memory on your question.
So the question is, how would you deal when you have a submittal by a licensed engineer who is maybe newer to the game and still gaining some experience, and it's pretty close to meeting the code compliance? It actually, let's say, it meets the code compliance, but there's maybe certain detail or connection or some formula that's being used that it doesn't make you quite comfortable. How would you do that in that case where it's more of a gray area where they meet all the intent of the code as described in this white paper, but there's still a level of comfort maybe by the plan checker who has a few more, it's a little bit more seasoned?
I think that's where the WABO and Structural Engineers of Washington white paper really helps us, right? Because we're supposed to be collaborative. So if we look at something, we have a more senior engineer in plan check, let's say, and there's a fresher, younger engineer with less experience submitting the drawing, and the senior engineer sees something that's, probably going to work, but it'll meet the code requirements. It'll be successful in passing the code requirements, but it may be, very costly to actually install. There may be other ways to consider. I would hope that they would pick up the phone and talk to each other and just say, hey, I'm looking at your plan. I'm seeing this detail. I can approve it. Not sure if you're interested in other suggestions, but there might be other ways to solve that structural issue that you're trying to address other than the means that you're taking, and just see if the door's open for conversation. That's good collaboration. That's how we kind of can work together, right, as a team to help the community get the best building for the buck. But that's totally up to the plans examiner and the structural engineer of record wanting to have that collaboration. If they don't, then we don't push it, right? We say, okay, we'll approve your project, and what you've submitted meets the minimum code requirements.
Fair enough. Good question. Response. I just want to say I'm not a licensed engineer, and I want to say kudos to like Chairman Spieler. There's a great responsibility that they take and liability, and I appreciate all the work that they do. This is a very important part of the code, extremely important part of the code.
This is Nick.
Thank you, Jose. This is Chair Spieler. I wanted to say what I really liked about this white paper was, I think it was on page 2, it said, and Andrew mentioned this, it should be a collaborative effort between the plan reviewer and the engineer, and to talk about things, if the plan reviewer thinks something, like Jose said, there is a better way, they should talk about it. But if the engineer puts his foot down and wants to do it his way and it meets code requirements, then it should be approved. But the one thing I really liked about this white paper was that they encourage the collaboration, even phone calls. And I know in the past, and it doesn't happen very often, but I'll receive a phone call from the plan reviewer and we talk about the item, and that really helps, I believe, streamline the process. I think it's less time for the plan reviewer to write down his list of items and explain what he's questioning. And then the engineer can, usually provide a quick answer and maybe also say, okay, plan reviewer, I like your idea. I'm going to change my drawing. So, the white paper is really good in my opinion. And it doesn't really reduce or allow engineers to skirt their responsibilities, but I think it also tells the plan reviewer that they should not get into the minutia of the structural engineering, but more just the overall, and make sure that the engineering meets code requirements.
This is Nick Kuntz. I want to echo support for what Chair Spieler and Mr. Maloney have expressed. That I think it's important that we have continued review, and I think that the business community is looking for ways to streamline process, and maybe we should have some conversation of how we can accommodate that without giving up review. I also want to support the comments by Mr. Marston, chair of the AAC. The primary reason that this is even on the agenda today, I believe, is because the disabled community spoke out with concerns about how vaguely worded the business community's demand was. So I'd just like to take a minute and understand from Chair Spieler's perspective in looking at this 4-point list that staff has provided in the staff report. How much, in your professional opinion, does accessibility fall into this? When you are preparing structural plans, how much accessibility are you looking at on a project? If there are ramps, wheelchair platform lifts, anything of that nature, how involved does a structural engineer get in looking at those aspects if they are on a project?
Okay, Nick, that's a great question. So we really make no decisions as far as accessibility goes. So the architect would show, for instance, you mentioned a ramp on their plans, and we would have to engineer that ramp so that it doesn't fail and, you know, stands up and holds up to the loads and the wind forces or whatever if it's elevated. So we don't have really any say in the slope of the ramp. You know, that's not part of our service. So we basically look at what the architect's proposing. Like, for instance, if there's an elevator that has to be a certain size, we're fine with the size. We just engineer for that size and make sure that it's structurally safe and adequate. I don't know, does that answer your question, Nick?
I think it does. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, to the extent that structural engineers have to review accessibility, that doesn't get left off of the plan review process.
Yeah, I don't think we review accessibility. The architect designs that on how it needs to be, the physical shape and dimensions, and then we make it work from an engineering standpoint and provide the strength and stability to that structure, whatever it may be.
Okay, can I ask you another question about process? You know, the whole reason the business community brought this before staff and then to the council was because they're looking to expedite the process. And, you know, we'd all like to cut corners and save a buck. I don't think that we should put the health and safety of the citizens at risk to do that for the business community. But in your professional experience, have you seen inefficiencies as it relates to reviewing structural engineering plans through the building department? And do you see ways that we might be able to provide some relief to the business community?
That's a good question too. I have not seen, I have not really experienced any inefficiency.
Paul, this is Jeff Hornbuckle. If you don't mind, I've got a good example of that.
Okay.
Nick, we were involved in a project. This was years ago, I think before Andrew was back at the building department. But the first round, you know, we submitted drawings to the building department, and the first round of plan check corrections that we received back had a comment that the structural drawings were exemplary. And so, you know, we went through the process of responding to the remaining plan check corrections, resubmitted, and upon receiving the second round of plan check corrections back, received a lengthy list of structural comments. So that, you know, kind of shows how the, you know, inefficiency can work. So, you know, I agree that it definitely needs streamlining.
So if I had seen, if that applicant had filed a an appeal to this board claiming a fairness of process, I would have been inclined to agree with them that we shouldn't, no applicant should get called to task for something that was cleared on the first pass, on later passes. So I agree that would be a problem. And I wonder if the chief building official can speak to that. Are there ways that processes can be developed to address issues like that? Is that beyond the scope of this discussion?
Actually, Andrew, before you respond, if I could just ask a question, because I think this maybe is in line with your response, but I'm wondering if there's like a checklist or anything that will go along with this, so that, structural engineers have, basically the same list that the plan checker is reviewing, by, that they can, refer to as they're, doing their structural drawings and calcs. Check everything off so that it's clear what will be, required of them, of the drawings. And so then when they submit, theoretically, there's no information that's missing, and it's going to make that, plan check process just that much smoother. So if it's not being planned, I would highly recommend that is part of the process. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Perfectly fine. So Nick, this is the process. That we are trying to meet that objective. We want to develop a standard for the extent of review that we're going to do that isn't overly detailed. We don't want to write a 205-page book, right? But we want to have a policy statement and the key elements of review identified. And Jeff brought this up, but I presented this or recommended this to the city council as a checklist, but I can't get to my checklist until I know what those elements are going to be and what is the extent of review we're going to do. So Jeff, we are headed, that's why I was nodding, we're heading right into a checklist or a form that's, the applicant's engineer can fill out. Or architect, if the architect's doing engineering on a residence, small addition or something they're comfortable with that doesn't require a licensed engineer. And everybody knows the rules, kind of the rules to the game, right? They know what we're going to look for, how deep we're going to look into the plans, and they can be prepared and be successful, ideally in the first or second round of review, and not have to go into 4 and 5 rounds.
Thanks. I have no more questions.
Okay, Nick, but I don't think I ever answered your question. This is Paul Spieler, Chair. So in my experience, I haven't really experienced lengthy plan checks that I felt were unreasonable. So And if I do see an unreasonable question by the plan checker, I will call him up and we will discuss it. And usually after that discussion, either he will agree with me or I will agree with him. And so, I think that many times a plan gets submitted that is not complete by the structural engineer because of time constraints or whatever. And so then the reviewer has a big long list of questions. So, personally, I don't run across that too much where I have a problem with a lengthy plan review regarding the structural portion of the project.
Thank you for that, Chair Spieler. And I also want to just make comment in support of staff. I recognize that the vast majority of applications that run long in their process do so as a result of poor preparation by the applicant.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, this is Chair Spieler. So Andrew, are we, I see on my list here or my outline, do we need to make a recommendation or a motion on this subject item?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think Board Member Langhorne wants to comment.
I have a brief
Okay.
comment. I understand the value of what's being done. I appreciate the comments people have made. The only thing that I saw missing here was this issue of construction plans that's in front of everybody and also specifications. They went and called for MEP and civil and that. What you're looking at is coordination. What I didn't see was any mention of fire protection. Just running a 4-inch riser into a building, you're running a 6-inch hole to allow the seismic annuluses that are necessary. That needs to be coordinated with a structural engineer. And I don't know that it's necessarily going to show up on MEP plans. So I would just say add fire protection plans, and most of them are deferred submittals, but it's important to understand the seismic loading that these pipes and mains are going to add to the structural engineering.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Chair Spieler here. So yeah, we often coordinate with the mechanical and electrical with penetrations, and of course that is done during our design process. And but you know that is an important item, Jim, and I agree that that needs to be carefully looked at because that can affect structure and then safety.
I ran into the same sort of problem, Jeff Hornbuckle was talking about, and that is that some of these things just didn't get addressed or sorted out because of the deferred submittal process. Some agencies, for instance, the DSA, they won't allow deferred submittals for fire protection any longer. Military, where a lot of my work was, everything's up front, everything's called out. I don't expect to see that happen, anytime soon in the local sense, but at least the big issues like that need to be considered, and they probably should be outlined or identified in your scope of plan review and specifications.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Andrew Stuffler. If the board desires, we will gladly add fire protection systems to the list of design criteria and specifications and construction plan perusal.
Okay, this is Chair Spieler. I think that would be a great idea.
I agree with the recommendation.
This is Jim. I also agree. I have a quick comment. I don't know how you could get this into the plan, but Chair Spieler and others have thought how good the phone collaboration would be to get these things ironed out. But is there any way to enforce that or tell the applicant you must be able to be available to have a discussion with our plan reviewers? Or can we just be postponed, or is there a way to really force some kind of one-on-one collaboration between those two parties? Is there any way to make that in here?
Well, Jim, this is Chair Spieler. So it's in the engineer's advantage to, have an expedited plan review. And if you're not answering the phone, that's just going to lengthen it. So then what happens is that your client then becomes upset with you because you're holding up the process. So I don't know if that would be I don't know if you would really need to make that a requirement, because I think it's just, the engineers appreciate the phone calls because it helps save them a lot of time.
Okay, thank you. That's good. I'll just say this right now. I worked for 40 years or 20 years with civil engineers, ran an office, but I have no training in structural, so I'm going to have to just listen to the professionals on our panel. But I'm glad that Paul and Mr. Langhorne brought up these things about making sure that the city can do the review, which I think Andrew put together a pretty good thing here in the few days you had, Andrew. That was amazing to go for that one sentence request into this whole document. So I applaud you for all that work. You said you're gonna add the fire code, the load problems for that, right, into here? And did I hear you say we could all vote for it in August, or should we just do something now? That's my comment. I don't have that much skill in this area.
Mr. Chair, do you want to provide the direction on how we either continue the conversation or close the item out?
Yes. So if we close the item out, do we give you a recommendation? Is that how it would work?
Yes, I don't have the chair's guide in front of me to see how that was worded, but I think we tried to word it that way. That's why I made a recommendation in the staff report so that the board would have something to point to make a motion, and they could amend that or accept it as it is. It sounds like there's some amendments that have been mentioned that might want to be included.
Okay, so that was my confusion. And the chair guide, I didn't have a request for a motion. So
okay.
I think I'll do that. So I think we have an amendment that we'd like to add fire protection as part of the review process to make sure that's coordinated with the structural structural plans.
And that's achievable. We can do that.
Okay. So
This is
I'd
Nick.
like to make.
Just quickly, Chief Building Official Steffler, you said you thought there might be amendments, plural. Was there something else that you caught that maybe we may not be remembering before we make this motion?
Yeah, sure. Let me tell you what my notes show. So Board Member Langhorne suggested that fire protection system loads and locations be incorporated into the 4-item checklist. And then there was also some discussion on the collaboration, the emphasis on collaboration. So that's something, if we put a checklist together, that is something we can include in the checklist, promote, and make sure we have staff available to facilitate.
Thank you, Building Inspector Steffler. I have the recommendation here in writing. If you want me to read this off, I think this is what we're going to vote on plus the 2 amendments. Is that correct? So for the note takers, should I read this off?
Yes, please.
The office recommends that the Appeals Board endorses Building and Safety Division adoption of Attachment 1 as a division policy and the above scope of structural plan reviews for all structural plan reviews conducted by the city's Building and Safety Division. That was Andrew's recommendation at the bottom of his letter. And then I think we could also add the 2 amendments there.
I think for purposes of a motion, it would be fairly easy to agree with the recommendations as written by staff. I think the important part is to draft wording for our amendments.
You're on the right path.
Okay, so let's make a motion. I'll attempt a motion, and let's make a motion to continue with these recommendations and to write up the additional requirements to add the fire safety requirements to be incorporated in the 4 points for structural review design. And then we look at this and approve the final copy at our next board meeting.
So just for clarification, we're asking that staff come back at the next board meeting with their wording of these amendments that we've discussed and review and put it to a vote at that time.
Yes, or I guess we could add that one recommendation right now and then approve it as it sits
There are
with
two.
that,
There are two amendments, it sounds like, and I would be in favor of letting staff draft the wording, how they would like to see that added to the recommendation. And then I think, I don't know, maybe we should have some discussion about that to help guide staff if necessary on wording those amendments. But I think it'd probably be best if we let staff draft those additions to their existing document, and then we rubber stamp it next time, for lack of a better term.
Mr. Chair, Board Member Maloney might have a comment to make. I've seen his video come on a couple times. John, did you have anything you want to say?
I was just going to second the motion.
Oh, okay.
okay, Nick, why don't you state your motion, and then we'll take a vote.
All right, this is Nick Kuntz. I move that this board asks staff to return with the recommended additions to the staff recommendations. I'm not wording this properly. Give me a moment.
To the 4 points of structural review, maybe?
Yeah. I move that staff return with an updated recommendation to include the two items that we discussed adding pertinent to fire safety. And somebody help me out with the second issue. Drawing a blank.
Collaboration.
Collaboration.
Well, collaboration's already in the white paper, I think.
This
Because
is
we're
Jim
adopting
Marston.
attachment 1.
This is Jim Marston. May I suggest something?
Yes, Jim.
The text does have the collaboration there. I just think it'd be nice when Andrew does his checklist to send out to the structural engineers that he emphasizes that no matter what's happened in the past, we really want collaboration with the plan checkers and make sure that they understand that that's a very important thing for them. I don't think we have to add it to this recommendation because the word collaboration is already in there.
All right,
That's my thought.
I see maybe how we can put this to bed today. Chief Stuffler, can you help me understand if we added fire safety into these 4 points, would it be a 5th point or would it be a subsection of one of the existing points?
I would propose that we include it.
Just a moment.
Oh, okay. I propose that we include it in item 1, hazard review and design criteria, because we're going to want to account for the loads of the fire protection system, if it's there. And then in item 2, the construction plans, where it talks about perusal of different specialty plans to make sure there's no conflicts between what's being recommended structurally and where the locations of the fire protection systems are planned to be.
So,
okay.
So Andrew Stuffler, this is Chair Spieler. Could we just add a I section at the end of each of those, or a G section in 2, and say fire safety?
Yes, if you could.
Let me ask, as Chief Building Official Stuffler, what do you think would be the best way to incorporate this? Would you like staff to be able to make the modifications and bring it back, or would you do you see that it'd be possible for us to easily resolve this here and now?
I'll make I'll give you an idea of a motion or a revision that could be proposed by the board or adopted by the board. to adopt attachment 1 as a division policy and the above scope of structural plan review with the following revisions. In section 1, hazard review and design criteria, add a subsection I, fire protection system loads. In section 2, construction plans, amend subsection A to read civil, landscape, architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection perusal.
So moved.
Jim Langhorn. I would also suggest adding it to item 4, the specifications, presumably because that's where most of the fire protection information exists when you have plan submittal. All this other is usually deferred submittal to contractor shop drawings. And so if the language, for that is also in the specifications, it reinforces to the contractor that it's part of the game.
And I am open to that if the board is.
Yes.
I agree.
So Chair Spieler agrees.
So we could amend item 4, sub item A to include fire protection systems in the list along with civil, architectural, MEP, structural.
This is Jim Marston. I like that idea, and I agree that we should add that too.
Okay, so can we move forward with the motion without, Mr. Maloney, go ahead.
I'd like to second the motion.
I think we need to make a motion, that one of the board members needs to make a motion, so I'll attempt to basically reiterate what Chief Building Inspector official Andrew Stepler said. So I make a motion that we adopt attachment 1 as a division policy, and the 4 points of structural review, with the addition of providing in under 1 hazards and review design, that the fire system loads are reviewed. And then under 2 construction plans on section A, we have civil, landscape, architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection approval. And then under specifications, number 4, we add after geotechnical specifications, fire protection.
By amending item A.
Pardon me?
By amending item 4A, by adding that.
Yes, amending item 4A with that.
Okay, I'm going to ask for one clarification, Paul, where you were talking about section item 2A. You ended by saying approval instead of perusal. And I don't think we want to require approval of the fire protection system as part of the structural review. We want perusal of it to see, just to confirm the loads are considered and the locations of the system are considered.
Okay, I accept that. Yeah, I accept that change. Use perusal instead of approval.
I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. So I made the, Chair Spieler made the motion. Do we have a second on the motion?
Mr. Maloney was eager to second a motion. I think I want to let him have that opportunity.
Sure. I'll second the.
Okay, great. So all in favor,
Well, let's
say
discuss
aye as I read your names off in alphabetical order.
just a
Jose
point of order.
Barajas.
Mr. Chair Spieler, just a point of order. We need to discuss the motion now that it's been made and seconded, and I think we have a board member who wants to discuss it.
Okay.
I just
Great.
had,
So
this is Jeff Hornbuckle. I just had one quick question regarding the fire sprinkler addition, requiring perusal of the fire sprinkler drawings. oftentimes those are a deferred submittal. So if there are no fire sprinkler drawings done at the time of submittal, will that be a requirement, or they will only be perused if they are part of the submittal? I just think that could get a little bit tricky.
Good question. I'll look for the board to offer some clarification.
Jeff's quite right. There are usually deferred submittals for these things, but when I was working with an ME firm, we always lined out in coordination with the architect where a riser was going in. We'd stipulate that. Since then, a lot more is being said about the seismic issues associated with hanging that pipe. So that coordination needs to happen. The structural engineer has to know what's going on. You don't want to be out there doing site review and seeing webs notched, because they wanted to run a pipe tight. It happened to me too many times in my career. So I think perusal's the right word, because if there's nothing to peruse, you don't have it. Approval, I think that's going to be a difficult thing because of the deferred submittals.
Okay, so this is Chair Spieler. So I guess the plans wouldn't be available for perusal. Is that correct? Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, that's often the case, right? There are no plumbing fire sprinkler drawings, for plan check corrections. Now, this is a question for Mr. Barajas. At the county, do you guys require fire sprinkler drawings for building department submittals?
Well, first of all, I just want to be clear that I'm here as a member of the community and not representing the county or what their processes or procedures are. In my experience, having done work as a plans examiner, as well as submitting work in other places with other jurisdictions, the fire protection or the fire sprinkler system tends to be a deferred submittal. We have seen that included in the calculations for design, for base of design. Those loads have been accounted for.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm kind of used to seeing is, the structural engineer will include
Loads, which is exactly correct.
Yeah.
Now, we always were spotting risers, and we were always including specific language in the specifications, and that's why I brought it up later, is that specifications sometimes the only place you're going to get your dig.
Chief Building Official, could you read item A under number 2 again, as
Sure.
we have amended?
So the way I understand the motion, it's going to read item 2, construction plans, item A, civil, landscape, architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection perusal. What's not clear, and I think what we're discussing, is what if those plans are not included at the time of the structural building permit application? A shell building.
Yeah, I mean, can we just simply say if included and if part of submittal or something like that? Because I mean, yeah, you could, if it's an interior tenant improvement, you're not likely going to have civil drawings, not going to have landscape drawings. You might not even have fire sprinkler drawings if the system's already there and existing and there's no, alteration to it. So.
I'm in favor of keeping it the way it is. The reason for it is we have civil, but we're not always going to have civil. We have a residential type deal. We're not always going to have landscape. So then we would have to put if under each one of those. Just my 2 cents.
I agree with this comment. I agree with this comment. He has valid.
Okay, and this is Chair Spieler. So yeah, typically what we do, if there is going to be fire sprinklers on the project, for instance, as part of the fire protection system, we'll have a loading in there that we designed for. And then let's say, like what Jim Langhorn mentioned, let's say there's a big pipe that needs to go through one of our beams for fire sprinklers, we'll have a typical detail on our plans that shows where they can put this opening through and what portion of the beam and the location. And then I think what happens is that the drawings, which are deferred submittal for showing the fire protection, will route their fire protection system through the structure in a way that complies with the structural plans. So I think the way it's written now with the perusal, that'll make sure that the plan reviewer checks that the fire protection loads are in the structural drawings, if in fact there is one that's required. So I think that's a good wording that we've got now.
I have one last suggestion, just based on the comment by Chairman Spieler. If the concern is also that the penetrations made by the fire equipment, whether it be a riser or something of that nature, is a concern that we add item G to number 2 to specifically call for review of fire penetrations.
Mr. Chair, I'm gonna make a suggestion to the board or an observation. One of the challenges in putting the list together was not going down a rabbit hole. It's super easy to do, those of us who are in the code. I mean, all you have to do is, open up a chapter and down you go. So I'm going to suggest, based on what I'm hearing, that the board consider in their motion that they continue to pursue amending item 1 by adding a sub-item H called fire protection system loads. And then on 2A, as it was amended to read civil, landscape, architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection plan perusal when provided. And then on 4A, include fire protection system in the list of specifications.
Okay, so Chief Building Official Andrew Stuffler, do we need to make a new motion?
I would.
Okay.
And you don't need to repeat it. You can say what he said because we have it recorded if you like what I said. Otherwise, you can amend it.
Okay, I like what you said.
So, but
So,
I want to acknowledge that Board Member Barajas added an additional element to this additional concern for the board to consider, and that is, do we want to list fire protection system penetrations as part of the structural plan review on, I think he was saying section 2, construction plans. So you can make the motion, but I don't want to, I want everyone to understand that Jose proposed something, and if you want to discuss that, now is the time to discuss that.
Well, my question is, Chair Spieler here, if we put that as an extra item G under 2, Jose, would that mean that they would have to have plans done and submitted at the time the architect's, the initial submittal is made?
That would only be if provided, and that was just a comment made based on the concern for the penetrations. I don't think it changes anything the way building officials stated. I'm okay with it. If item E is not added, G to item number 2, I think we still got it covered.
Okay, great. Any other discussion? All right, I'd like to have the motion stand with the added comments that Chief Building Official Andrew Stuffler made. Do we have a second on the motion?
John Maloney, I'll second the motion.
Okay, we'll call to vote. All those in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Jose Barajas,
Aye.
Jeff Hornbuckle,
Aye.
Nick Kuntz,
Aye.
James Langhorne,
Aye.
John Maloney,
Aye.
Jim Marston,
Aye.
Paul Spieler, aye. The motion carries with a unanimous decision. Well, that brings us to adjournment. We need a motion from the board to adjourn, and then we will close roll call for vote. Please use your cameras if you have one. So I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, Nick Kuntz has made a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'm a second.
Okay, who was that made a second?
Jim Langhorne.
Jim, thank you. Now we'll call the vote. We'll use roll call again to call for vote. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Jose Barajas,
Aye.
Jeff Hornbuckle,
Aye.
Nick Kuntz,
Aye.
James Langhorne,
Aye.
John Maloney,
Aye.
Jim Marston,
Aye.
Paul Spieler, aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your attendance today and all your input.
Good work, everyone. Thanks, Paul and Andrew. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right.